Welcome to Next 20. In honor of Verizon's 20th anniversary, this is a new series where we will have conversations about race, social justice, technology, and business issues that will define the next 20 years. Each episode will feature emerging and established changemakers to explore the inspiration behind their activism and their ideas to build a better future. And I'm really excited about this conversation because with all the news about police brutality, injustice, and inequality going around all over the world, particularly here in the US, we get to share the story about how it does not end there. We get to go beyond just the headline and understand what happens when people are just given grace and they have a chance to be more than a tragedy. So today I'm joined by three amazing guests. First, Adrian Burrell, a multidisciplinary storyteller who uses film, photography, and other media to shape culture. Xavier McElrath-Bey, Deputy Executive Director at the Campaign of Fair Sentencing of Youth, advocating for youth justice and sentencing reform. And last but not least, Christina Swarns, President and Attorney in charge of the Office of the Appellate Defender, and soon to be the CEO, or should I say CEO, of the Innocence Project. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Great.
Thank you.
So I would like you all to respond to this first one. So three Black people at different stages in their lives. I'd like each of you to tell me how you're feeling right now. You know, I just mentioned, with a lot of police brutality we're seeing basically almost every day on social media. There's new names seemingly every day. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and the list goes on. How are you all feeling right now?
I would say I feel exhausted and hopeful. Yeah, I guess those are words I would use.
Xavier?
Yes, I love that dichotomy there. And I think it really does sum up where a lot of us are. Hopeful, obviously, because we continue to work. And I would agree, exhausted, because obviously the barrage of images and videos and footage that we see, the way it's been impacting us has really just been relentless. And so it just tells us we have to continue to fight.
Christina?
I agree completely. I think it's been overwhelming in many ways to continually, even though we do it, I think all three of us do it every day. This is sort of a 24-hour barrage of information about how the criminal legal system fails Black people. It's a lot. It's overwhelming. But at the same time, I am inspired by I think the call for systemic reform. And particularly, right, like the fact that folks are not accepting the easy answers anymore, it doesn't appear. And so I'm inspired by that because what we need is a lot of systemic reform right now.
Absolutely. And Adrian and Xavier, most people would probably look at both of you and see your successes today and really have no idea what both of you have been through. What's remarkable about each of your stories is, and I say this quite literally, is that you live to tell your story. So Adrian, I'll begin with you. Can you tell me about your upbringing in Oakland, California and the work that you do today?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Oakland, California, a really big family. My grandmother has 16 kids, 58 grandkids, and right now there's over 300 of us in the East Bay in the area, like her descendants. She had her first great grandchild about, I think, 3 years ago now. And so there's a lot of us, and my family wasn't exempt from being impacted by mass incarceration or any of the drug epidemics. I know them very intimately, unfortunately. And growing up dealing with the police was my first experience dealing with the police. I remember I was in elementary school. I was probably in like the second or third grade, and I was late, and I was walking to school. I was rushing. I was eating these cheese crackers, the ones you unzip and you dip into the cheese. I'm eating some cheese crackers, and this police car starts pulling up on the side of me, and I look, and I'm like, oh, they don't want anything with me. And they stop me and say, hey, where you going? And I stop, and I'm on my way to school. I'm late. And say, you look like somebody that ran from us before. And I'm like, I ain't never ran from y'all. And I drop my cheese crackers. It's like, why you littering? And I pick up the cheese crackers and I start crying. And then I say, I got to get to school. I'm late. And they said, keep walking. And they followed me probably all the way to school. They followed me all the way to school. At this point, I'm crying. I turn back and I cuss at the police. And the security guard like, what's wrong? I'm like, man, they keep messing with me. They keep messing with me. And they go in and they ask. And I wasn't like a huge third grader, you know what I mean? And they asked, like, does he go here? And he's like, yeah, he's a student here. Why? And they said, oh, okay. And then they just walk off and they left. And, you know, even after that, dealing with police being like, oh, you remember me? I arrested your brother last week, as they take my father to prison. And I'm just like, it's just it's a lot. And in terms of the work that I do right now as an artist, I do believe that Black life is resistance, you know, from the biggest forms of protesting or advocating to the smallest quotidian, you know, forms of joy and love. And I seek to like capture that in the short stories that I tell and in the photography and share that with the world so we can start to reframe what kind of world and future we want to exist in while understanding the sacrifices that our ancestors made for us to be here.
Absolutely, that's beautiful. And I know you're an MFA student currently at Stanford. You're also a former Marine, budding filmmaker, but this still didn't actually stop you from becoming also a victim of police brutality. What happened last year in January?
Yeah, I was waiting on a family member, one of my cousins. There's plenty. I was waiting on a family member.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, and he was taking a while, so I was checking my phone, like, oh, I wonder why he's not here yet. So I go outside, and when I get out there, I see the officer with his gun pointed at him, and he has his hands up, and he has his motorcycle helmet on, and I know he likes to ride with his music, and so I'm thinking to myself as he's yelling at my cousin, I'm like, he can't hear him. So I start recording, and I say, hey, he can't hear you, and he's got his gun drawn. He's like, get back in the house, and I'm like, no. I'm on my porch. I'm about 40 feet away. There's a barrier in between us. There's cars in between us. My hands are perfectly visible. I'm like, I'll just stay right here and record. And he's like, get back in the house. He repeats that. And he says, okay, you don't want to listen. You get to go to jail. And that's when he comes up on the porch. He has his gun drawn still. He comes up on the porch, puts the gun in his holster, turns his back on the person he just drew a gun on. There's no backup. There's only him. Grabs me, slams me up against the wall, then slams my head up against a pole. And illegally detains me and tells me I get to go to jail now. And I'm just questioning, like, what's going on? I'm questioning why. And in that moment, it was like, you have to decide between maintaining your humanity and surviving. And there's this fine line that you have to tote. It's like, okay, I'm a man just like you're a man. And I don't have to do what you're telling me to do. I can physically resist you. And that physical resistance or even the verbal resistance can lead to me losing my life. And there's something that just is taken away from you in that moment that you can't get back. You know what I mean? Like being handcuffed, being put in the back of the car, not understanding what's going on, feeling like I know I didn't do anything wrong. Like what's going on? Like, why are you tripping? And yeah, it's just a lot that comes with that's taken from people who go through that and worse that they can't get back.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I watched the video you posted to your Facebook, and I read an article about it, and I was just struck by the fact that, like you said, you were far from what was going on. He had his gun drawn, you were on the porch, and he accused you of somehow messing with what he was doing. And what's crazy is let's just say if your cousin was doing anything, he left your cousin, right? He wanted to come after you, and it just felt as though, you know, you didn't have the freedoms of being a person. You know, you were doing something, you were filming him, which is obviously your God-given right. And for whatever reason, he felt threatened by that. And I think a lot of this, you know, one of the things I read in the article was how you said something needs to change. And you talked about different things about in the community, whether that's the community needs to be involved with how police are hired or different things like that. And this was over a year ago, and now we're still seeing a lot of these things play out. I saw Minneapolis are trying to defund, you know, obviously the police department. In New York City, where I live, they're trying to slash $1 billion of the $6 billion of the NYPD. So knowing that it was over a year since, you know, you had your own experience, you know, especially being a filmmaker, how has your experience shaped the way that you bring kind of your work to life?
Well, it makes you a part of a family nobody wanted to be a part of. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of families, impacted families in Vallejo, whose loved ones weren't as lucky to survive, and I did. And so as I came across these mothers at these protests, and they would I didn't even know who they were, and they would just run up on me. They would just grab me and say, "Baby, I saw your video. I'm so happy you alive. I'm so happy you here. I love you. Take down my phone number. Call me if you need anything." Like, it does something, and I think that I couldn't, once you're a part of a family, you ride for that family, and so that's pretty much just what I've been doing. Going to the protests, documenting as much as I can. I made a short film called Favor and Grace that's in post-production right now that kind of brings it a little bit of attention and shines a light on what's going on in Vallejo, and just trying to continually find different ways to be a catalyst for and help get those voices out there. And as far as the community being more a part of the hiring process for the police and something like that, I just think that at this point, I feel like the system is broken, and I feel like over policing doesn't work. And I feel like those same resources that are aimed towards hiring police and having people come in contact with, people with racist biases and all these different things, it needs to be aimed at just bringing more resources to the community at a root level. And then you just won't need so many police. And if you want to call that abolishing the police, or if you want to call that defunding the police, so be it. But I think really we just need the resources to be aimed more at benefiting the community, not at hiring more police and giving them more militarized equipment.
Absolutely. And one of the words you just mentioned was the word grace. And I think that word is so powerful. When I think about everything going on right now, I feel as though Black bodies are often not given grace, right? And you can compare that to so many instances of specifically white people who have done the same things or worse. I remember seeing a video of a white man literally shaking a knife, a butcher knife, at a police officer, and the officer almost running away, right? And you have a cell phone, and the officers attack you. And one of the things I left out that I remember reading was that you told the officer, like, "Hey, I'm a vet," and that was kind of like the reason why he let you go. I believe he said if you weren't a vet, you would have went to jail. So like,
well, what actually happened was, as I was in a police car, he looked at my car parked in the driveway, and I had a bumper sticker, United States Marine Corps bumper sticker. And he says, "Oh, whose car is that?" And we start a conversation like that. And he asked me if I was on the military, and he says, "Yes." And then he takes a deep breath and he says, "Well, I'm gonna let you go this time, but you understand why I did this, right?" And I just looked at him and it was like, "No, I don't. I don't understand."
That's really, really heartbreaking, to be honest. And Xavier, switching to you for a bit, I read your story as well, and I know you became very familiar with the criminal justice system at a very young and early age. Can you talk about your childhood?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say, Adrian, I'm sorry about your experience. It's interesting because you had the ability to capture that on footage, or you're able to capture that horrifying moment. But just hearing you recount what you went through, it reminds me so much of many experiences that I had when I was a child. Interestingly, back in the 80s and 90s, to be honest with you all, being beat up by the police, that was the norm. And I'll share a little bit more about that, my experiences growing up. But to just give a general sense of what it was like for me, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I grew up in Back of the Yards, a neighborhood that was very much disinvested. Unfortunately, me and my early memories consisted of going to Port Ministries on 51st and Ashland, which was a homeless shelter where we were able to get food. I remember my mother often frequenting the Salvation Army around the block. I remember, many times us not even having food, not having the basic necessities. My mother often having to run an extension cord from our place to our next door neighbors, if they were kind enough, for energy. And I'll never forget one winter in particular when the gas was cut off and we were so cold. And we didn't have any other recourse really because the fire could start a larger problem. And so poverty was really just the dominant theme for me growing up. Like that was something that was inescapable as a child, obviously. Other things that really impinged upon my life, sadly, which were also uncontrollable, I had no say-so over, was the fact that my mother contended with severe mental health problems. She was undiagnosed and untreated for schizophrenia. So that meant she would hear voices. That means she would talk to herself. My brother would later develop the same ailments. And my stepfather, well, first and foremost, my biological father, and soon after two stepfathers were physically abusive. When I was 6 years old, DCFS got wind of the abuse of my first stepfather, and they ended up sending me and my siblings to a foster care system that was unfortunately just as abusive. After 2.5 years of being there, my mother convinced him to let us out. And it was then that we met our second stepfather, in which case he was also very abusive. But my mother, oftentimes, whenever he would hit us, or whenever he would beat her, whenever we were chased outside the home, unfortunately, it just meant that we would sleep in abandoned buildings or go to her friend's house. She never called the police. She was always afraid that if DCFS found out about it, that they would take us away again. So sadly and unfortunately, that was our life. We were often on the run, often trying to seek shelter, and that was just a given, unfortunately. By the time I was 11 years old, I ran away. I joined the gang. By the time I was 13 years old, I was already a gunshot victim. I was shot in my face at point blank range. An accidental shooting. My friend was playing with a gun and it went off. By the time I was 13, sadly and unfortunately, I also had 19 arrests and 7 convictions. And so throughout those 19 arrests and 7 convictions, I have to say I had many experiences much like yours, Adrian. Like, I can recount many experiences. One of the more, perhaps traumatic ones of all for me was when I was 11 years old. I remember me and my friends, we went to Marquette Park, and Marquette Park was a big park on the south side, but it was about a good mile and a half from where I grew up. But it was a predominantly white community. The only thing that we knew as kids is that they had better bikes than ours. And so we decided to go and steal bikes, and I jumped off my bike and I took the bike of a kid, and my friend did the same, and we went running down 63rd. But before we can even get back, the police grabbed us. They threw us in the back of the squad car. And I'll never forget how the officer was hitting me in my chest with a stick, calling me nigger and telling me don't ever come back in his neighborhood ever again. And it wasn't because, I think he was more upset about the fact that we were black and brown kids going into a white neighborhood to commit our crimes. And for me, honestly, that was just what I thought. I thought that was just the norm. I thought the beatings that I got in the regular were the norm. One time, standing on 51st and Ada, a car pulls up. I knew it was the police. Me and my friends, we went in different directions. I got caught in a block and a half away in the back of a broken down a car in an empty lot. And the police asked me my name. I said, what? And I turned around and he hit me real hard. Boom. And with that one hit, I was such a small child and his fist was so big in comparison to my face that he busted my nose and blacked my eye in an instant. And when I looked up at him and I could see the rage in his face, I covered back up. And then he said, what's your name? He searched around the car, didn't find any weapons. He said, get out of here. And I remember going back to Sam's store on the corner of Ada, walking in, and I was bleeding profusely. And he said, what happened to you? I said, the police beat me up. He said, I know, I just saw him chasing you. But we never knew that we can talk to anybody about it. We never knew that we can, maybe go to the police station. Does that make sense? The police beat me up, so I'm going to go to the police station? It didn't make sense to me as a child. So I just thought that was the norm. Unfortunately, that was just some of the many traumas I experienced growing up. And because of those, many, many instances of unforgiving and uncaring systems, I believe, along with the trauma I experienced in my home, along with the young, impetuous, risk-taking mind that I had as a child, sadly, I made a lot of horrible decisions and mistakes. And at 13, I was involved in a murder. I was involved in the murder of another kid in my community, and it was something that I was instantly remorseful of. But sadly, the system didn't see me as that. They didn't see me as a child. They saw me as a monster. And with my extensive juvenile arrest record, stated that I had a violent nature, and under no circumstances should I be considered for early release. And with that, was given a 25-year sentence in prison.
Right. And eventually you were able to get out. I believe it was in 13 years. But during that time when you were, in jail, you were able to get your education. And obviously going through all of that, I'm just curious, what your mindset was and kind of what kept you going, right? Because I think, hearing your story, hearing Adrian's story, as another Black man, it's kind of hard sometimes to continue to see these images on TV. And one thing I saw your TED Talk, I know you go around and you share your story, and even your word today, you continue to help the youth. But for some people, it's almost like it's a fine line. I think Adrian mentioned that earlier. It's almost like you want to continue to tell your story, but then you also want to share triumph, right? And I think you have found a way to not only, go through tragedy, but also triumph in many ways. So I'm just curious of, number one, what kept you motivated? So being so young, how did you have the foresight to be able to say, I want to be more? And then also today, kind of what keeps you going? Because it's not, your story didn't end with, getting arrested and going to jail. You're continuing, you came out and you're doing great work. So what keeps you kind of going?
I have to say, like if there was any particular moment in my life when things instantly changed for the better, I would love to share that. I have to just say, really, it was just the evolving brain. I think, it's not like the heavens opened up and the light came shining down and I changed in an instant. Faith did have a lot to do with it. But I just think that it was just a matter of me growing up. I went into prison when I was 13 years old. I was in 7th grade. I was a child. So for me, going in, while I was still in grade school, I didn't know what it was like to even step foot into high school, let alone, have that experience, and for me, it was just a matter of growing up. I started realizing that, this hurts. It hurts not to be free. It hurts not to be with my family. It hurts to see my family still struggling. It hurts to wake up every day and seeing myself change as a person, knowing in my heart that I'm a caring, compassionate person, that I'm not a monster like they said I was. I just felt like there was something deeply, existentially wrong with what I was going through. And I couldn't quite put words to it, but I knew that this was just not the reality that I should be living because I was never truly a monster. And I just felt, as much as I changed, if only the world had conformed to that, if only the world had seen me for who I was and responded to that, in so many words, if only there was another chance. And fortunately for me, I had a light at the end of the tunnel. I knew that I would be able to get out in a matter of years, but many of my peers were given life without parole sentences. They were told that they would never be free. They were told that they were not worthy of a second chance. So imagine that going in at 13, 14, 15, and having to spend decades in prison, having gone through the positive change, the normal natural progression of change that happens with every human being. Like we know through studies that kids tend to age out of deviant behavior. Like, when you get older, you start to think twice. You start to weigh consequences. Your prefrontal cortex, your ability for formal operational thought enhances. And so you're like, no, I don't think that's a good idea to go down that route. Like when I was a kid, I had 19 arrests and 7 convictions, but I'm afraid to get this parking ticket today. It's just a human progression. It's about human development. And I think that, unfortunately, with the narrative that was painted of us during the 90s, when they said that we were super predators, when they said we were monsters, it took a while for science to catch up. It took a while for adolescent brain development research to finally state and show and prove that kids' brains are in fact different. And because of that, many U.S. Supreme Court decisions have been informed, and many decision makers across the country, most importantly, have came to recognize that kids are different. And through the work with the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth, I've been able to, carry the banner that says no child is born bad. And fortunately, a lot of changes come as a result.
That's great. And it's crazy, like hearing you use the, word super predator, and obviously you were a kid. It reminds me of, I wasn't at least aware at the time. I was super young, but hearing stories and reading about the Central Park Five, who now the exonerated five, and just watching the Netflix film and seeing how they were depicted. These are children, and then there was more recently, there was another situation with the young men and a young woman who went to Columbia, and just, how it seems like the public just rushes in this judgment, right? And once again, Black and brown folks are not given that grace. If it was maybe a white kid, they're often saying like, oh, they're just being kids. There's so many instances of like a college swimmer who did something terrible and got, probation for 10 days or something, or a college student doing this. So, you're just constantly reminded kind of the dichotomy and just the juxtaposition in many ways. But Christina, I want to turn to you because you've basically devoted your career to fighting the, injustice. And so hearing the stories of Xavier and Adrian, what comes to mind?
Well, a lot of things come to mind. The first thing that comes to mind with respect to Xavier is how frustrating it is to hear him talk about his childhood and, you know, without, the thing I want to say is, right, he should have been caught, right? There are structures and systems that should have intervened, right, for Xavier, like a long time before, he's 13 years old and he gets involved in this homicide, right? And so we need to think about, right, a society that allows a child to be living in homeless, to be couch surfing and living on the streets, right? That's a problem. And then you compound that problem and say, not only are we going to allow that to happen, we're then going to turn around and say to the child who has lost all structure, right, and all guidance and all of this, that when you do something wrong, we're going to impose the most severe sentence, right? That's a broken system, right? That is a fully broken system. We know, right? If you leave kids out in the street with nothing, what is the expected outcome? So I find that extremely. My first response is I find that frustrating. The second response to his story is, of course, that it is symbolic of sort of a lot of the research that we've seen, right? We know that, young Black boys are adultified or, treated as adults in ways that young white children are not. There's a study that shows that, young Black boys starting at age 10, if people look at them and see them as at least 4 years older than their actual age. And so you see, that's why a 13-year-old can go, right? A little kid can go into the system and a system can see him, right? Because they're seeing him through the lens of race, which is as it stands right now, is a distorting influence. And they see and they treat him as an adult, right? Again, that's a broken system. So there's so many ways. And then in terms of Adrian's story, the thing that I think immediately is, thank God for the video, right? That he had running. And so many people that I represent and I have represented over the years have had, the exact same story, the exact same situation. I remember as a young public defender, saying to clients, did the police read you your rights? Young, and they would say, yeah, the cop told me I had the right to shut that, that's what I had, right? And we, it was talked about the 80s, the 90s, right? This has been going on for years, right? And until the advent of video, right, and video cameras and people on the street, right, documenting what is essential, right? The policing culture that has been going on for all of this time. It was condoned by the court system, right? It wasn't, people just kept it moving, right? We had people come in all the time, Black guys, coming in from hospital, doing hospital arraignments, right? And those things were just not dealt with in, people like me would be screaming, like, look at how is this person coming in like this that wasn't in a fight, right? They're coming in through the system, beat like this, and there is, and I would make a record, this police officer, blah, 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 this is his bad, and nothing would happen, right? There's this sort of culture of impunity, frankly, that has gone on, in the criminal legal system for way too long. And that, in my opinion, is, in significant measure because Black and brown people were bearing the brunt of that abuse. And so it was tolerated.
Yeah, I actually just, got familiar with the word impunity with everything going on right now. And, knowing that's a big reason why police officers are often not charged in a lot of these cases. But,
Yeah.
Your work, I can only assume, is often, unforgiving, right? I mean, you talked about being a public defender. It reminds me of, the film Just Mercy, or the book Just Mercy, which kind of shows, how difficult that job is. And, as much as you want to help people, there's 50 times as many people who want your help. But, I'm just curious, in your work, what is your work, your day-to-day like, and what keeps you motivated, right? You're in a kind of a different position, not being a Black man, but coming from a Black woman's perspective, as kind of it goes, Black women are always, kind of the foundation of just Blackness. So I'm just curious how you continue to move forward.
My day to day right now is right. I run an office that represents people who've been convicted of serious felonies. And so we have people coming in and out every day, convicted of robbery, convicted of murder, that's what we do. How do you deal with it? I would say for me, I find the people I represent and their families and the resilience and the extraordinariness of what they have endured inspiring, and it makes me, so it shuts up whatever in my head, whatever concerns or complaints I may have about it's late and it's work, right? Because people have endured so much more than I have, and the resilience and the humor, right? The grace, the people I represent are unfailingly, really remarkable people and interesting and fascinating. They're just full human beings, right? And so just like with anybody, if you walked in and met me or Xavier or Adrian, right, you would meet a person and you engaged by that person and you would never want harm to befall them, right? Because you see them in the fullness of their person, right? And as long as I think I approach, the work that way and my colleagues approach the work that way, right? That we are engaging with human beings, with kids, with families, with grandparents, who have stories of third grade like I do, or, it becomes really, I don't want to say it's easy, it's hard work, but it's not, it's not a burden to do the work. It is, it's honestly for me a privilege and a gift to do the work because I have been blessed to meet some of the most extraordinary people, ever.
Great. And last question before I open up a couple questions to everyone. So I'm just going to read off a couple stats, and Christina, I just want to hear kind of just your reaction to them. So we know that over 70% of all youth ever sentenced to life without parole in the U.S. are people of color. Black youth are sentenced to life without parole at a per capita rate that is 10 times that of white youth. Mm-hmm. And more than 620 people serving life without parole as children have been released from prison since Miller versus Alabama. And I believe Xavier earlier mentioned even the Supreme Court, and I know you tried a case in the Supreme Court, one of the few Black women to do so. So I'd love for you to talk about that a bit as well.
So yeah, the stats are appalling and consistent. I would just say, that is the juvenile life without parole, and the juvenile system is horrendous. But you can do that from stops to arrests to bail to sentencing to parole and probation to incarceration and to the death penalty, and you will see the same exact run of disproportionality. The case I had in the United States Supreme Court was a death penalty case. It was called Buck versus Davis. It's a long story, but I will make it super short, which is to say my client was represented by an attorney who was trying to prevent Mr. Buck from being sentenced to death. In Texas, in order to be sentenced to death, the jury has to make a finding that you are more likely to commit crimes of violence in the future. It's a future dangerousness finding that the jury has to make in order to impose a death sentence. So counsel says, okay, we're going to, prevent that from happening. We're going to hire an expert. And so they did. They hired an expert. The expert takes the stand at the sentencing hearing and says, Mr. Buck is more likely to commit crimes of violence in the future because he is Black, period. So the jury agrees he is sentenced to death. So what we have in this case is a Black man condemned to death based on testimony that says he is more likely to be violent in the future solely on the basis of his race. So this is 1997. This case went through to the Texas Appeals Court like 3 or 4 times. It went through the federal system. There was an execution date set. And all of this time, I just want to be clear, not all of it, but most of this time, this issue was before the courts. And the courts denied it. They said, nope, we're okay. We're okay with this execution going forward on those grounds. So ultimately, I came, when I was with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, we came into the case very late. And after about 5 more years of litigation, we took it to the United States Supreme Court. And that was the first and only court to agree with us that no one can be executed based on their race. That was the first and only court to reach that conclusion, which I emphasize all the time because people see the decision and it's like it's a lovely and powerful decision. It was written by John Roberts, which is remarkable. But it's really important that court after court after court heard this evidence and was good to go. They were like, nope, we're good. He could be executed, no problem. So ultimately, John Roberts writes an opinion which is very powerful, and he says, we sentence people based on what they do, not who they are, and he makes other sort of findings that should be obvious and should not have taken my client spending almost 20 years on death row before his sentence was taken away.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really powerful. So now just questions, 2 questions for everyone. I'll start with Adrian, and everyone can kind of chime in. So I kind of alluded to it already, but you all are not defined by your stories, but they're definitely a part of who you all are. So how do you feel as though your story makes you who you are today and kind of influences how you move through the world?
I would say that I've always been a storyteller, and I would sit around my grandmother. She's in her 90s now. She lives in West Oakland. And I would listen to her talking about coming to Oakland from Louisiana on a train. I would hear her talk about how they was chased away by the Ku Klux Klan and how, she had these 16 kids. And now because of, the drug epidemics and mass incarceration, she's buried over half of them and outlived them. And I made a statement earlier about knowing the sacrifices that our ancestors had to make for us to be here. And I think that's shaped me to this day, just knowing, documenting my family and documenting Black life and seeing the things that we've overcome and being like, okay, well, I can go one more corner. I can go one more hill. I can keep going. And I think that that's something that is helping instill a certain kind of resilience and grit in me.
I approach it most importantly with appreciation, with gratitude for a second chance. With the desire to see a better world and also remorse for the things I did in the past. And so I feel like all that makes me who I am. But most importantly, a desire to see a world where kids are treated humanely with dignity and respect. And that's why the work that I do with the campaign is so important. I just want to ensure that no child is regarded and thrown away forever. And that's how it really shapes who I am today.
Appreciate that. Christina?
I would say I always grew up with a family who emphasized, that we are better than no one and no one is better than us, right? We were, that's kind of the way it worked. And I think that ultimately my work in the criminal justice system and the exposure that I've had to, the people who are forced through that system, I get to bear witness and tell that truth and translate that truth, hopefully, to people who otherwise cannot and do not see it. Because of the work that I do, because of the career that I have, I walk in a variety of circles and I view it as my job, my career, my life's work, to share, the stories, the humanity, the truth of the criminal justice system to people who, like I said, otherwise close their eyes to it, right? There's so many people still today, even right now, in this moment in the world, struggle a lot to see the humanity in people who have made terrible mistakes. And, we still see policymakers slicing and dicing and saying, well, this kind of person deserves grace and that kind of person doesn't deserve grace, right? Nonviolent offenders versus, when the reality is that, every one of us, right? Every single one of us all fall short of the glory, and every single one of us is entitled to grace. And so I think of it as my job as fighting to demand that grace for all of us, and sort of reminding people that there is no difference, right? It is there before, and I absolutely right. It is there before the grace of God go wide, and that's for every one of us, right, in the world, right? Because so many, like you pointed out, so many people, white folks, have made catastrophic mistakes, but they've had the benefit of a system that gives them a pass. And sort of my job and my commitment is to demand that system give that same pass, that same access, that same entitlement to everyone, regardless of race. And so, it is for me about bearing witness and sharing that witness and making people see what I see, in a really unflinching way.
Thank you for that. And lastly, to everyone, you all have been doing this work before, folks were marching in the streets maybe 3 months ago, right? You've been, doing this maybe your whole life or for some time. But how do we ensure, or for others, how do we ensure that this is more than just a moment, and this is really a lifelong commitment and movement moving forward? Start with you, Adrian.
I don't have personally any concerns, at least from what I've been seeing, that it's only a moment, because I think that there's been in this moment, there's been a lot of capacity building. There's a lot of people having conversations that weren't being had before. Like there's people in their 18 years old, 21 years old, organizing their first protest and getting a taste of what it looks like to fight for the liberation of your people. And I think that doesn't die in a moment. That translates into a capacity. And then when that next moment hits, the outcomes are going to look a little bit different, and it's going to look a little bit different every time. And we're going to keep working our way towards that ultimate manifestation of what we want, that freedom and that liberation.
Xavier?
Yeah, I would say, the best way possible, just continue to fight. It's interesting how the media can easily sway us from one issue to the next, right? Just weeks ago, we were caught up in the frenzy of the pandemic, and instantly the world changed. And now, obviously, people are not wearing their masks. People are trying to go back to business as usual. I think that it's important that we be mindful. Well, first and foremost, that this pandemic has been impacting our communities most, but also be mindful that, our fight doesn't end with public opinion. Our fight doesn't end when the next hot topic pops up. We live through these things every single day. So I would just say, keep up the work. Our young generation really is just taking it to a whole nother level. I feel very hopeful because of that. And I just hope that, we not let up, that we continue to hold systems accountable, that we continue to call for systemic and racial justice, and that we ensure, most importantly, that those who have been harmed that their voices are being heard, and particularly the communities that are still suffering as a result of the inequities that we continue to face every day. And so, again, don't let up. Keep raising that banner, and do not allow the next hot topic to distract people from the reality that we have to face each and every day.
The only thing I would add is that, the remarkable thing about this moment, or the lesson of this moment, is that when we organize, right, and when we demand even big things, right, power will yield. And we have to keep up the demand, right? And so that's, I think, the lesson of this moment, right? The young people out there who have been unrelenting and unwilling to accept incremental and small and, sort of the stuff we would have accepted once upon a time. It's important for us now to realize our power, to take hold of that, to harness it, and be unrelenting in the demand for structural change. And we can't let up, and it's hard, and everybody on here knows it's hard. It is exhausting. It is, spiritually draining. But, the more of us that are out there, right, we can pick up when the others of us get tired. But the fight has to go on, because power will concede. They will concede to the will of the people, and I think we need to keep demanding that change.
I think I'd be remiss. I think, in talking about all this, I think, folks within Verizon and outside of Verizon are going to be looking at this. It's important for them to know ways in which they can also contribute and help. I saw a video of Xavier and talked about ways in which you can contribute specifically to the Incarceration Children's Advocacy Network, but doing things like donating gift cards to stores for food and supplies, equipment for shopping and job search, such as phones, computers, and tablets, short-term loans to individuals, and even donating to fair sentencing of youth.org. And I'm not sure if anyone else has anything other to add in which ways that people can kind of contribute and give back. But I think that's, in all of this, it's important to talk about, the misconduct and the tragedies, but it's also important to talk about ways in which we can kind of work towards a better tomorrow.
Yeah, I would just agreed 100%. I was just going to throw in there, there are lots of now bail funds across the country, right, that people can contribute to for those who are incarcerated and are literally being held solely on the basis of poverty. The office that I run now, the Office of the Appellate Defender, we provide support to people who are coming home from prison, who often are, going into homeless shelters, so we try to provide, the whole run of things, clothing, food, referrals to housing and all of those. I mean, that's entirely privately supported work. But the whole universe of people who are going through the criminal legal system, there's an enormous amount of need and enormous amount of ways that folks can and should step in and support.
Thank you for that.
I would say also that. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
I would say also support your local community organizers. Like find out who are the people making a difference within your community. Like where are the artists? Like who are these people? And just ask them like, how can I support you? Or just also think locally.
And if you're in Oakland, hit up Adrian.
Yeah, that's right. And I would just say, generally speaking, you know what? Invest in the human value of those who have been systematically dehumanized, right? Devalued. Help, employ formerly incarcerated people, give jobs, provide, apprenticeship opportunities, on-the-job training. I think those are the things like, once I finally had a job, my world opened up. It made a big difference for me. So I would definitely say that, any employment opportunities you can help provide for folks coming out, it would make a difference. And so I would just add that. And thanks for sharing those points. And most definitely, if you can, support the campaign for the fair sentencing of youth. The work that we're doing is laser focused on ending extreme sentencing for kids, but also supporting folks who are coming out, because the struggle doesn't end with coming out. And that's why it's important that we get support.
Thank you. And I want to end things off by saying, obviously Black Lives Matter, and it's not a political statement. Right. It's a statement of humanity. Black lives are under attack, and they have been for hundreds of years. And I just want to thank Christina, Xavier, Adrian. I want to thank all of you for sharing your story, taking this time, and tune in for the next 20. And this has been an amazing first episode. I appreciate you all.